Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 5th of October 2023. This is going to be a quick one. I always say that. It genuinely will be. I have very little content to communicate here. It's just not a lot of information coming out from the front line, and I think that says quite a lot itself. I think there's a bit of a situation of the counteroffensive coming to a grinding halt in particularly Robotina, Velika Novosilka. We're not hearing anything from. In fact, we're hearing more that the Russians are counterattacking near there. So anyway, we get to those points shortly. This is on the screen the key for what the lines on my map mean. If you don't know my map by now, please pause and check that out. So just to remind you that the map is still in its early days of being tinkered with. There will be changes to particularly the double blue lines at the front. You want to concentrate on an outermost blue line for Andriy Perpetua's Russian defensive line. This inner one will be merged. The polygons will be merged. Yeah, we're just still working on that. Apologies. So anyway, not too much to report in this northeastern sector from Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna down here. The Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, talks about all the usual kind of some of the usual place names being mentioned. There is a claim of a Russian attack, a raid perhaps into the northern border of the Kharkiv Oblast up here. In fact, I got that located. It's here. So the Russians attacked towards this village from their border there. Not quite sure what their intentions were. Ukrainian General Staff report that Ukrainian forces repelled a limited Russian attack north of Zberna on October the 4th, likely in reference to a limited cross-border raid originating from Belgorod. Not much more to report about that. And then all the usual claims about these places up and down the front line, claims that the Russians are still trying to hit logistics, still claims about bridges being hit on the Oskil River, although I don't know whether that's just regurgitating the same claims as the Russians have done for the last few days. It seems to be, yeah, we've taken out 5 bridges in the area. Yeah, it's what you claimed a couple of days ago, so I don't know if it's adding anything there. And then we, I guess, come all the way down to Bakhmut, really, and there's not too much to report from Bakhmut either. You can see that there are no mapping changes from any of the 3 mappers that I use, particularly in this area. The ISW says of Bakhmut, and I will read this. So, Ukrainian forces continued offensive operations in the Bakhmut area and reportedly advanced on October the 4th. Yesterday, the Ukrainian General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces continued assaults south of Bakhmut and achieved partial success near Klishchivka, although that's not reflected in the mapping at the moment. A correspondent of Kremlin-sourced outlet Izvestia claimed that Ukrainian forces hold positions within 40 meters of the railway line near Klishchivka. I mean, that's a very pro-Russian source saying that they are within 40 meters of the railway line. I've seen video evidence of them clearing parts of the railway line, so I don't know that is true. As in, I think they're trying to sell that in as positive light for Russia as possible. You've got this railway line coming up or down from Klishchivka, goes around the corner, comes down here towards Andriivka, past there, and then into Kurdyumivka. That is now really what the battles are about, and I think the Russians have been pushed back from that defensive line. Okay, so the Russian mill bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces resumed armoured assaults near Klishchivka and Andriivka towards the railway line and are fighting is ongoing in contested grey zones northeast and southwest of Andriivka. Russian military officials claim that Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks near Andriivka and Klishchivka, and some mill bloggers claim that Russian aviation, including helicopters and artillery, are firing on Ukrainian forces in an attempt to stymie the attacks. That wouldn't surprise me. The Russians really don't want to lose anything around Bakhmut, and so they are counterattacking quite strongly whenever they lose positions here, as we have seen elsewhere as well. That is apparently causing quite a few losses to the Russians, as I said yesterday, but yeah. No changes to the mapping, but still quite a lot of attacks going on, particularly north and south of Andriivka there. Right, let's move on south, and we'll come to Avdiivka, where we have seen some Ukrainian successes around here, particularly towards Pisky from Nivelsky. So that's this is what we're going to be talking about in the ISW. The mention of a crossroads. I presume that is this major crossroads there. I think there's fortifications underneath that, although Andrew Perpetua the other night was saying they have been destroyed, so it's been, I think, thoroughly hammered. But anyway, the ISW says of the area, a Russian mail blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces captured a contested grey zone near Novelska and are now within 2 kilometers of the crossroads in Pisky. I think that's probably that crossroad, as I say, and 2 kilometers puts them to about here. That's the grey zone. So the Russian defensive lines are here, as according to pretty much all the mappers have the Russian defensive lines around here, and the Ukrainians would be somewhere back here, and that's about 2 kilometers from there. So that would track with what the mappers are saying. I'm going to pop into look at Kenneth Gregg now, just for a kind of synopsis of the whole front line. Late last evening, Kenneth Gregg, the Finnish fighter who has been fighting out there, not fighting at the moment. Right now, the Russians' defense lines around Novoprokopivka, and that's where we're going to go to next, and Verbova, are boiling over. We are currently making attack after attack and pushing hard. We will probably get more information in the evening, obviously from as a result of sort of yesterday's activity. Even up in Andrivka, where we've just been, our people are pressing on. The Russians seem to be forming a new line of defense along the highway, 3 kilometers behind the contact line. If they lose it, it's goodbye for the Russians in Opitny and Bakhmut. That is the highway that we've been talking about quite a lot. This one here to the east of the front line. And that's what Kenneth Gregg is talking about. He carries on by saying, other front lines remain as before. Also business as usual regarding our missile attacks on Crimea and other weapons depots, including S-400 SAMs in the Belgorod region. Okay, that's it. So not a great deal of information. As I've said this morning and over the last few days, the Russians are absolutely hammering Ukrainian positions with their FAB 500 bombs. That it does include Toretsk as well. Here, up and down this whole front line, just the whole front line in general is being hammered by these glided bombs that can be released sort of 50, 70 kilometers behind the front line and allows them to hammer the Ukrainian positions. Okay, so coming on now further to the south, we're going to bypass Vuhledar. There's activity, I think, in Novomykhailivka. Oh, actually, so this is what Andrew Perpetua does have as a change. So yesterday, you might remember there was a tree line that was getting squeezed that went along here. Originally, I think had that fortification in, and it was a wide area of Russian control, and then that got squeezed to just this kind of tree line part, and now that's not there at all. So according to his analysis, the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians out of controlling that tree line, that one sliver of control there. But yes, so Velika Novosilka down here, not a lot to report. Some minor rejigs or gains for the Ukrainians in this particular area, but essentially not a lot of mapping change there. The ISW reports of this sector that a Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces remain active in the forest areas northwest of Pryutne, where they are constantly trying to restore lost positions. So the Ukrainians have been pushed back in this area. The Russians have had some success north of Pryutne, north and northeast of Pryutne. Talk about forest area up here. Not quite sure, it might be this area, but that's directly north of Pryutne. So it could well be some the tree lines up and around here, which is where we've seen the Russians have some success towards over the last few days. So pushing on up here. We have the ISW saying, one mail blogger claimed that Russian forces have the initiative in this area of the front and are counterattacking near Pryutne and Zavitny Bazyanya. That is to the east here. We have Zavitny Bazyanya just coming down the Mokry Yali River. Get that sometimes. As it meanders its way down here, the Ukrainians took control of Urzhany and have since kind of ground to a halt here. It looks like they've turned their attention to the west to Rybotna, and the Russians are still in Zavitny Bazyanya. Although there have been various attacks towards there. It is protected by the river as it meanders around it. There is an earthen bridge by the looks of it there that I'm not sure whether that is still intact or not. And we've seen lots of activity around here where the Russians had tried to attack towards Uruzhani with a number of different motorized units and were thoroughly repelled. This is what I talked about this morning and yesterday, that 15 vehicles were taken out, and we've got evidence of all 15 vehicles being taken out there. So yeah, difficult for the Russians there, but there is fighting around here. The Russians are claiming to have the initiative in certain areas, as it says here, and counterattacking Priutne, near Byzania, and also Staromilsk. Another Mill blogger claimed that unspecified Russian Spetsnaz, so the special forces elements, are successfully pushing Ukrainian forces back near Priutne, and another claims that elements of the 37th Motorized Rifle Brigade have been advancing in the forest areas of Uruzhani since the end of September. So claims that they are advancing in the general Uruzhani area, possibly here near to the river, on the other side of the river, maybe elsewhere. So various claims. The Ukrainians seem to have taken their foot off the gas here considerably. Whether it really matters to them that the Russians are, trying to push hard in some of these areas, about really what the objectives are for the Ukrainians and for the Russians there. So it's not worth particularly hanging on to the odd field here and the odd field there. They've got maybe bigger objectives in mind, and what the question still remains as to how much of a big objective is Robotina. How much do they intend on taking some of these key positions before the autumn finishes? I don't know. As you can see here, Syriac maps indicates that the Ukrainians have been pushed back. The Russians have pushed forward in the Lvov area, as shown here, and they say Russian army launched a counterattack and managed to recapture some positions west of this and southwest of Lvov, following a Ukrainian army withdrawal there, which is interesting. I don't know whether that is the case. I mean, that would be significant because that's pushing the Ukrainians back along the manned trench line and out towards the tank ditch. So that would be significant if that is indeed true. Surat Maps goes on to say, as we enter October, the rainy season is upon us, and with it, the end of the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the south. They're basically saying the counteroffensive is over. During the last days of Ukrainian attacks, they've considerably decreased, and despite the fact that resources are still being allocated to these fronts, the Ukrainian military capabilities to achieve a considerable advance and reach no longer the Sea of Azov, but the second main Russian line of defense are not enough. So a bit of interesting English there, essentially saying they're not going to reach the Sea of Azov, which is abundantly clear, right? And even the idea is even the second line of defense, whatever you call that, whether this one is the second line or whether that one is, Direct Maps is saying they don't have enough to reach there really. And it's hard to disagree. They have ground to a halt. The Russians, are throwing everything at this. However, I don't know how long the Ukrainians will keep it up here in this particular sector. Gradually, the focus of attention will shift from the south to the east, where the Russian army, as it did last year, is expected to resume offensive operations along the entire front, with the aim of controlling the rest of the Donbass outside its control. 1 year after the annexation of those territories, the situation on the ground is still very different from the new maps. At present, the annexed oblasts are divided as follows, and he does some analysis of how much land they each control. Within this situation, Russia has not been able to take the territory it considers its own. Even to this day, the populations of the Donbass are still targeted by Ukrainian shelling. This has a negative impact on the image of Russia, which seems unable to achieve the objectives of the special military operation. For reasons such as these, the option of a major Russian offensive is more than necessary to return the situation around and avoid a permanent freezing of the conflict. In fact, the coming months would present an opportunity for the Russian side to initiate this offensive, as the failure of the Ukrainian counteroffensive will negatively affect the defensive capabilities of the Ukrainian army, which, in addition to facing quantitative losses during the Battle of Bakhmut and the southern fronts, will also have to face a reduction in US military aid. side. Every day it seems clearer and clearer that Ukraine cannot win a long-term war, and even less so against a Russia that still retains large amounts of military resources, including those mobilized, a large part of which have not yet entered combat and are still being formed in the rear. In the coming months, we may witness important changes in the course of the war, and is approaching its second year. I would disagree with that. I think there's actually a bit of projection onto Ukraine what Russia are experiencing. I don't think Russia have the ability to conduct any serious counteroffensive or offensive. I don't think they have. They might have enough troops on paper. I don't think they've got enough equipment and supplies to do that effectively. Then I'll just read you what Suret then goes on to say. During the last few months, a lot of data has appeared regarding the total number of casualties in the Ukrainian conflict on both sides. It's better to be cautious in believing these numbers, some of them quite overestimated and oscillating, as it will be difficult to get a reliable number until the war is over. It is also important to note that some data includes both fatal and non-fatal casualties, making the numbers quite high. One should even be reluctant to believe the numbers provided by ministries of defense, as well as those alleged NATO documents that appeared several months ago. Being conservative and cautious, what can be affirmed is that the conflict has already claimed more than 100,000 deaths, making it one of the deadliest conflicts in the world in the 21st century, and the largest in Europe since the Yugoslav wars. Moreover, it is interesting to see how this conflict is looking more and more like a war of attrition, similar to the Great War, in which a great amount of resources are consumed in an attempt to make small advances on a broad front of approximately 950 kilometers in length. But it is also interesting to note the balance of forces that is gradually being achieved between the Ukrainian forces losing more troops in proportion to their counterpart. I would contest that. And the Russians' arrival of mobilized forces, mercenaries and recruits. If this trend continues, we may be approaching a turning point in the conflict that will be reflected in the events of the year 2024. Okay, so what we have from the pro-Russian side here is the Syriac Maps, which is clearly a pro-Russian account with the way it couches everything. I mean, I'm pro-Ukrainian, I'm happy to say that. I don't really bothered. I'm morally and politically pro-Ukrainian, but I'm not going to lie about data, and I'm not going to pull the wool over your eyes because I don't want to pull the wool over my eyes, and I'm not into lying. It's not my thing. So I'm pro-Ukrainian, but I will present things fairly. He, I think, is pro-Russian and is presenting things unfairly, as in not critically looking at what the Russian MOD is telling him, and therefore, the idea is that the Russians have got way more troops, which but the losses are very much in Russia's favor, and I would say that that's completely opposite. And if you're not going to listen to anyone, it's going to be the Russian MOD, because they have lied through their teeth, and yet Syriac will parrot what the Russian MOD tells them. So take that with a large grain of salt. Okay, we're going to go to the Robotina area now proper. From what the ISW say, as you can see, Syriac Maps has those Verbove improvements there for the Russians. Ukrainian forces continued offensive operations in western Zaporizhia yesterday and made confirmed gains. So there are confirmed gains for the Ukrainians here. Geolocated footage posted on October 4th indicates that Ukrainian forces have marginally advanced along small local road east of Novopokrovka. Additional geolocated footage posted on October 4th confirms the Ukrainians hold positions near a trench system that lies along the Orikhiv-Tokmak route between Robotina and Novopokrovka. Okay, so this is to the east of Novopokrovka, some gains somewhere around here. Let's have a look at the geolocations that are referenced. So here we have claimed VDV. So this is paratroopers shelling entrenched Ukrainian positions using a BDM-4. So I always think shelling is artillery, not other things. I mean, other people use shelling as referring to rocket attacks and missile attacks, and that is not shelling in my English language. But indirect fire using a BND-4. So it's interesting. It's being used as indirect fire to the east of Novopokrovka. So this is Ukrainians in this position. We'll see what that tells us. No, we won't. We'll do approximately nothing. There we go. So this is where the Ukrainians are. Well, that is pretty much what we knew anyway, and actually that is Well, I say it's what we knew. This is all grey zone, right? So when you have geolocated advances, what that means is the Ukrainian positions have moved further into the grey zone. But actually, in this area, the Russians are still in the anti-tank ditch area there. So that's the anti-tank ditch. Well, it could well be that first one are the Dragon's Teeth, anti-tank ditch, and then the manned trenches, which diverge around here. And so there's an interesting situation around there. How far down have the Ukrainians pushed the Russians along these ditches? Well, they are close to the ditches in that area, and that is apparently confirmation of gains. And then here we have Russian artillery of the 42nd Motor Rifle Division shelling Ukrainian positions along the road connecting Robotyne and Novoprokopivka. 3 undocumented vehicles are also in the videos. 2 of them seem to be Bradley, 1 destroyed and 1 abandoned. So there are some loss of vehicles there. That has been geolocated to this position. So this is where the Ukrainians are, again, according to the ISW, denoting an advance for the Ukrainians. So that is, this is the area of the alien's head. This is where we know the Ukrainians have been for quite a long time. That they are still there, I don't think tells us anything. I don't think that is an advance. Nonetheless, still struggling to move, in a really sustained major way into the north of Novoprokopivka. Although Deep State map does have their defensive line for the Russians pushed further back in this very northwestern part of Novoprokopivka. So there are some gains, apparently, as according to Deep State map. Make of that what you will. It's not been reported by the others as of yet, but it could be some success there for them. We go back to the ISW. Russian mill bloggers. The Ukrainian General Staff noted that Ukrainian forces were partially successful during offensive operations west of Robotyne. So this is towards Kopani. So west, that is your west of Robotyne up there. So this is towards Kopani, which has seen some success for the Ukrainians over the last month or so, but again, it's fairly marginal. Here, the ISW says that Russian mill bloggers themselves have noticed that Ukrainian forces have increased the intensity of attacks along the Robotyne-Kopani line, and some Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces advanced towards some Russian defensive trenches on this line over the past day. Russian mill bloggers additionally claim that Ukrainian forces continued attacks near Verbove and Novoprokopivka. On the other hand, several Russian sources claim that Russian airborne troops, the VDV, have managed to push Ukrainians back around 2 kilometers near Verbove. Yesterday, a Russian mill blogger posted graphic footage of a paratrooper detachment of the 7th VDV Division reportedly clearing a captured Ukrainian stronghold somewhere between Robotyne and Verbove. Okay, so first of all, the idea that there's 2 kilometers of gain for the Russians in this area. It could be that Russians have counterattacked there. 2 kilometers would be pretty substantial, pushing the Ukrainians back there. Let's assume that Andrew Perpetua's line there is correct, or is a benchmark to take that on. There you've got 1.7 kilometers. So we're going to stretch it out to 2 kilometers. That means the Ukrainians have been pushed back, possibly from nearing the manned trench line to pretty much the tank ditch there. So that would be really significant. Syriac maps indicates that the Ukrainians are under pressure there. Quite how much, though, is open to debate. That footage they're talking about is this. It's graphic. It does have dead bodies in it. It's not really anything other than some men walking through a tree line. So you can't geolocate that at all. It's like, I don't think it indicates anything particularly, although the translation of the Russian claim is that airborne troops conducted additional reconnaissance with drones and assault groups of winged infantry entering the battle, and the quick and well-coordinated actions of the Novorossiysk paratroopers did not allow the enemy to put up serious resistance, and militants of the armed forces of Ukraine were destroyed. So clearing out a small bit of a tree line somewhere in this area. So I don't know that, as I say, that tells us particularly anything. And that is pretty much that. Not too much else to report. They go on to talk about the attacks on Cape Tarkankut. So just to remind you that there was an amphibious assault somewhere in this area. as the Ukrainians using these rigs as springboards to attack, have done an amphibious attack in the last sort of 24, 36 hours, achieving apparently whatever objective they had, and then shooting back to these rigs. Unfortunately, one person fell off one of the jet skis and they were captured. But nonetheless, that was a pretty significant move by the Ukrainians there. And then down on Dnipro, just like everywhere else, there are huge FAB glide bomb strikes. This is in the Dachi area, the Antonivsky Bridge. So the Ukrainians still have a presence there, and in fact, apparently reinforced, and that's why they were bombed with those bombs. That is in this area where the Ukrainians have been for quite a long time now. What activities taking place along these islands, along the Dnipro River, I'm not 100% sure. They seem to be active. There are boats being lost for both sides every day. So there is a lot of activity taking place there. Whether it's somewhere that Ukraine could even possibly use as a area to attack and to form some kind of pincer, I don't know. It possibly somewhat contingent upon their successes up here. There's no point attacking across here unless they've got really serious aims of meeting up in the middle. Might be some of the rationale there. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Not a lot has happened today. I don't know if that is further sign that, as I think, the Ukrainians are possibly culminating in the south. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much. Please take care. Speak soon.